The rays of sunlight that pierced through the bars filled Wentworth's heart with hope as he walked hunched over the prison corridor. In his hands, the old man carried a small mattress and a small bag of personal belongings. The mattress was so worn out that the cotton inside had clumped together. But Wentworth knew how to find joy in every moment of life and wasn't disappointed when the prison guard walking behind him ordered him to pick up the pace. Order must be maintained. I ended up here for a reason, so why should I be upset now? Thought the old man, tightly clutching his belongings. In his years of working in correctional facilities, the guard had seen many things, but he had never had to watch over prisoners of such an advanced age. So, seizing the opportunity, he discreetly whispered to the old man, "Listen, if anyone mistreats you or anything like that, don't hesitate to call for help. I'll assist you however I can." Wentworth smiled and shook his head. "Thank you for your kindness, but I'm to blame for everything." The guard shrugged in surprise, but didn't insist further. Finally, the prison corridor came to an end, and the old man realized that he would be placed in a secluded cell located quite far from the guard post. Well, it seems the prosecutor went all out here too, the old man thought with frustration. The guard ordered the elderly man to stop and stand against the wall while he opened the massive iron door. "Well, go on. This'll be your home for the next few years," the guard said, giving the old man an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Wentworth, squinting a bit, crossed the threshold of the prison cell. At that very moment, an unbearable stuffiness and foul smell hit him in the face. Unaccustomed to it, the old man felt dizzy and leaned against the wall. Overcoming the initial shock, Wentworth decided to be bolder and not show his fear to his cellmates. Meanwhile, the door behind the old man closed shut. "Hello, good people," he greeted, realizing that he needed to start somewhere. In response, there was some indistinct muttering, as if the old man was invisible to everyone in the cell. Well, no big deal. In life, everything happens for the best, Wentworth thought, trying to cope with his inner anxiety. There were many people in the cell, and in the first few minutes, he even felt a bit overwhelmed, trying to find an empty spot among the numerous rows. Fortunately, he didn't have to admire the prison life for long. Soon, a hoarse voice came from the corner of the cell. "Hey, old man, why are you standing frozen? You're not a statue to be admired." Trying to make out the person in the dimly lit room, Wentworth replied, "I just need a place to settle down and lay my mattress for the night." "Well, I'll help you with that, old man," the inmate responded and squeezed through the rows to approach the old man closely. The stranger was shirtless, and his muscular torso was covered in prison tattoos that meant nothing more to Wentworth than childish drawings. "You'll be living in the hen house, old man. Unfortunately, there's no other place for you," the man said, smirking sarcastically. Wentworth felt that there was some catch behind his cellmate's words. "What hen house? Do you have a poultry farm here?" the old man asked, surprised. At that moment, everyone started laughing, and many of the inmates nodded approvingly, enjoying the newcomer's successful joke. Little did they know that the old man had no understanding of prison hierarchy and its laws. The only person who didn't laugh was the man standing opposite Wentworth, whose eyes revealed undisguised anger and hatred. "A good joke, old man, but you better laugh a little less, or I'll break your ribs in an instant. You probably haven't realized where you've ended up. You'll be living with the outcasts. See that bed next to the toilet? That's where you'll be," he said. Tears welled up in Wentworth's eyes. The old man had already guessed that he had been assigned the most shameful spot in the prison cell, automatically categorizing him as an outcast. Understanding that he couldn't handle the arrogant bully, who was younger and much stronger than him, Wentworth gloomily made his way to his corner. In that moment, a tall young man jumped down from the top bunk and abruptly stopped him, taking the old man's arm. Wentworth looked at the stranger questioningly, but he addressed the old man's offender. "Hey, Omri, what's wrong with you? Why did you label the old man as an outcast without even figuring things out or listening to him? That's an abuse of power, no less," the young man said. The tattooed man immediately tensed up and glared angrily at the old man's defender. The young man was robust and strong, capable of putting up a fight if necessary. Therefore, Omri settled for words, trying to emphasize his contempt for the young man. "Don't meddle in other people's business, Paul. I'll handle the old man myself. And why should I ask him anything? He probably stole a sack of corn from someone else's field, and that's why they locked him up here. Am I right, old man?" Omri said. "You're wrong. I'm punished for an entirely different crime," the old man replied. "Wow, so you offended some girl, old man? So that's your thing, huh? Well, then you're on the fast track to becoming an outcast. Prisons don't like guys like you. In case you didn't know," Omri said, rubbing his hands with satisfaction. Trembling with tension, Wentworth spoke with a trembling voice, saying, "I'm here for an attempted murder. I wanted to shoot the prosecutor's son with his friends, but the last moment I got scared." Suddenly, the inmates, pushing each other, rushed towards the old man, hugging him and shaking his wrinkled hand. Everyone wanted to get a closer look at the man who dared to challenge the prosecutor's son. Only Omri, harboring hatred, returned to his corner, where he felt like a king. He realized that the opportunity to humiliate the old man had been missed, and now he'd have to wait for a more convenient moment to carry out his plan. Unbeknownst to the inmates in the prison cell, Omri's hatred toward Wentworth had nothing to do with external animosity or old personal grudges. The truth was that Omri secretly, from everyone, had received a substantial sum of money from the prosecutor, and a guarantee of assistance for earlier release, if he eliminated the old man quickly. Meanwhile, Paul helped Wentworth with his belongings, and offered him a place next to him. "It'll be calmer that way, and you'll be a good neighbor, I'm sure," the young man said, shaking the old man's hand. Engrossed in their activities, the rest of the day flew by unnoticed, and soon everyone sank into an uneasy sleep. Only Wentworth couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, reminiscing about his past and the events that led him to the prison walls. Just a couple of months ago, everything had been different, and Wentworth had a beloved job and his granddaughter Sarah, who had long become the meaning of his life. Wentworth had worked as a gamekeeper for a long time, and the forest was his fully explored domain. Unfortunately, his family life hadn't turned out well. Returning from the army, full of hopes and ambitions, a young man, he immediately fulfilled his long-held dream and became a gamekeeper. He didn't think much about starting a family and got married when he was already in his 30s. He noticed the beautiful Stacy in a neighboring village where he often traveled for business. The courtship and romantic encounters lasted for about 6 months, and when Wentworth proposed to Stacy, she gladly accepted. They had a quick wedding, and everyone thought that a happy family life filled with joyful moments and experiences awaited them. Initially, everything was exactly as they imagined, until Stacy became pregnant. Of course, it goes without saying that for Wentworth, it was the most desired news of his entire life. He was ready to pamper and care for his beloved wife, surrounding her with love and attention. The entire period of Stacy's pregnancy went smoothly, but when it was time for delivery, it turned out that the baby had assumed an incorrect position. The local hospital's midwife couldn't help, so she advised Wentworth to take the expectant mother to another hospital. After examining Stacy, the doctors assured Wentworth that everything would be fine and advised him to wait in the waiting room. Anxious and restless, Wentworth paced back and forth, awaiting any news. When the midwife finally emerged, she avoided eye contact and nervously informed the worried man that he had a healthy daughter. "What about my wife? What happened to my wife? Why are you silent?" Finally, tell me what happened, Wentworth asked, struggling to hold back his scream. Oh, accept my condolences. We couldn't save her, the doctor said wearily. Wentworth stepped outside and, for the first time in many years, burst into tears. He couldn't understand why fate had been so cruel to him. In an instant, it had given him the joy of fatherhood, but, at the same time, had taken away the love of his life. Thus, Wentworth became a widower with a little daughter in his arms. The inconsolable father named the girl Patricia, and despite the loss of his wife, he didn't fall into depression. He did everything possible and impossible to ensure his daughter lacked nothing. Time flew by unnoticed. Of course, one can hardly describe how difficult it was for Wentworth to raise his daughter alone. They faced many challenges in their life, but from early childhood, the father tried to instill only good and kind qualities in his daughter. However, to Wentworth's surprise, Patricia began to show her strong-willed character early on and grew up as a headstrong child. Perhaps the lack of maternal love and care was to blame, but Wentworth remained faithful to his late wife and couldn't fall in love with anyone else. By that time, the man had been working as a gamekeeper for several years and was deeply concerned that he might not be devoting enough time to his daughter. However, by the time Patricia reached adulthood, she had become too insolent, and her father tried to unquestioningly fulfill her every wish. But as Patricia grew older, she began to reproach her father more and more for their poverty and living in a forgotten village. Dad, why are we still living here? We should move to the city. There are more opportunities there, and I can find a decent husband, the daughters said, further distressing her unhappy father. Daughter, we were born and raised here. Who needs us in a strange city? Wentworth objected, realizing how difficult it would be to convince his daughter otherwise. That day, the conversation ended in a quarrel, and afterwards, Patricia packed her things and left home. Wentworth caught up with her at the bus stop. Patricia was determined to go to the big city in search of a better life and was not swayed by any persuasions. Helpless, the man whispered goodbye and placed money in her pocket that he had been saving for her wedding for many years. Take it, Patricia. It'll be useful in life, Wentworth whispered, tears welling in his eyes. But his stubborn daughter, without even apologizing to her father, set off towards a new, unknown life. For a long time, Wentworth waited for news from Patricia, but apart from a couple of Christmas postcards, he received nothing. Often, especially in the evenings, Wentworth would go through old photographs and cry, reminiscing about long-gone times. She visited her father for the first time in 7 years since she left. Patricia's appearance clearly indicated that those were not the best years of her life. The girl had visibly lost weight, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. To Wentworth's great surprise, she was holding the hand of a 5-year-old girl. Dad, meet Sarah. She's your granddaughter. I've been facing some difficulties. Well, my husband and I are planning to move to another country. Wade is a businessman, you understand. We plan to settle down there with him and then bring Sarah with us. Will you help us? Patricia asked, without the slightest hesitation about her request. Of course, my dear, Wentworth said, taking the little girl in his arms. At that moment, the man did not know that his daughter would never return. At first, Wentworth waited for Patricia to get in touch. But after 3 years had passed, he realized that he had been raising not a daughter, but a true traitor who was capable of abandoning her child for personal gain. To his great joy, Sarah turned out to be the complete opposite of her mother, and grew up as an intelligent and clever girl, listening to her grandfather in everything. For Wentworth, these years became the best time of his challenging life. When Sarah turned 18, she refused to leave the village, and only thanks to Wentworth's persistent recommendation, she agreed to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. Every morning, the girl hitchhiked to college. It was the same as on that fateful day that changed her life, and Wentworth's life forever. As usual, Sarah stood by the roadside, trying to stop a passing car. Suddenly, an expensive car pulled up next to her, and the guy behind the wheel kindly opened the door for Sarah. When the girl comfortably settled into the front passenger seat, she noticed two more guys sitting behind her. It was too late to get out, as the car had already started moving. Sarah, trying to dismiss her bad premonitions, believed until the last moment that everything would be fine. On the way, the guy who was driving kept talking, and it was evident that he came from a wealthy family. At some point, Sarah even smiled, thinking that all her fears had been groundless. But when the guy turned onto an inconspicuous road leading into the forest, the girl became noticeably alarmed and asked, her voice trembling with excitement, "Where are you taking me? Stop the car. I'm not going any further." In response, the three guys laughed in unison, and Sarah realized with horror that she had fallen into a trap. She struggled to remember everything that happened afterward. The brazen bastards violated her, taking turns in trying to humiliate Sarah as much as possible. Afterward, they left her in the woods, and one of them said, "Don't you dare tell anyone about this. My father's a prosecutor, and if anything happens, he will destroy anyone." But Sarah didn't care anymore at that moment. The unfortunate girl cried, adjusting her torn dress. She returned home late at night, so as not to be seen in such a state by the villagers. As soon as Wentworth saw his weeping granddaughter in her torn clothes, he understood everything without words. "Who, darling? Who did this to you?" the old man asked, with only one question, feeling righteous anger consuming his heart. Sarah hesitated to say anything for a long time, and adamantly refused any contact with the police. Wentworth only learned about one of the guys being the son of a prosecutor a week later, when Sarah, after a failed suicide attempt, told her grandfather the whole truth. "What a scumbag, threatening you. Well, don't worry. He will pay for everything soon," the old man said through gritted teeth, and went to the storeroom for his weapon. A few days later, the old man ambushed the prosecutor's son at the exit of a nightclub. The arrogant guy stood with his faithful friends and smirked. When Wentworth approached him and directly asked about what had happened, the guy pretended to remember nothing and stepped aside. "What, you don't remember now?" Wentworth shouted, and throwing a photo of Sarah into the idiot's face, drew his weapon from his pocket. The guys immediately changed their expressions and ran away. Wentworth, who had wanted to kill all three of them before, merely fired a warning shot, hitting their legs and buttocks. Soon the police arrived, and the old huntsman, who offered no resistance, was handcuffed. Throughout the investigation, Wentworth did not utter a word and, refusing a lawyer, signed anything. At the trial, considering the defendant's age and the circumstances of the case, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Before being incarcerated, the old man was visited by the father of the young man, who unleashed terrible threats against Wentworth. In response, he merely shook his head and turned away to face the wall. Wentworth managed to fall asleep only towards dawn, with just a couple of hours left before waking up. To his surprise, prison wasn't as terrifying as he had initially thought. After all, there were people here too, and if you behaved correctly, no one would harm you. As it is known, people get used to everything, and Wentworth eventually adapted to the prison routine and rules. Despite the diverse crowd in the cell, the old man befriended only Paul, who stood up for him on that first day. Paul turned out to be a good guy, and he and Wentworth developed a relationship of trust. As it turned out, Paul was an orphan, and no one sent him any parcels. The old hunter, feeling sorry for the unfortunate guy, shared delicious food with him, which was regularly sent to him by Sarah. Sarah understood that she bore some responsibility for what happened to Grandpa Wentworth, so she tried to do everything possible to make his prison sentence less severe. It so happened that Wentworth often talked to Paul about his granddaughter, inadvertently arousing genuine sympathy for Sarah in the guy's heart. With the old man's approval, Paul dared to write a letter to the girl, telling her about his life. As it turned out, Paul took the blame for someone else's guilt. Several years ago, he worked as a personal driver for a very wealthy family. Paul was satisfied with everything, and the decent salary only reinforced his belief that he had found a good job. Everything was going well until one evening when the homeowner's intoxicated son decided to drive himself. The arrogant rich man, unable to handle the vehicle, fatally hit a person on a pedestrian crossing and then fled the scene. The guy's father was an influential person and immediately confronted Paul with the fact. "You take all the blame, and I'll give you money and arrange a normal life for you. You'll serve a year in prison and come out, and I'll take you back, and I'll even give you a car from the garage, any car you choose." Confused, Paul, being an orphan, ultimately accepted the businessman's offer and took the blame, stating during the investigation that he was the one behind the wheel. "Well, it's never too late to start a new life. Does this rich man at least help you with anything?" Wentworth asked after listening to the guy's story. "No, he deceived me," Paul sadly replied. Over time, a true love blossomed through correspondence between him and Sarah. The young couple exchanged dozens of letters and eagerly awaited the day they would finally meet in person. Meanwhile, Omri, unsure of how to approach the old man, whose authority in the prison grew stronger with each passing day, decided to take extreme measures. One morning, he took out a knife, clutched it in his hand, and headed towards the unsuspecting old man. Fortunately, Paul noticed his maneuver in time and rushed in front of the thug, shielding the old man with his own body. Despite the intervention of their fellow inmates, Omri managed to stab Paul with the knife. The bleeding guy was taken to the prison hospital, and Omri was placed in solitary confinement, where he faced a new sentence and transferred to another correctional facility. Paul spent over a month in the hospital, and when he was discharged, Wentworth could hardly recognize the once strong and robust young man. Now Wentworth began to treat Paul as his own son, and Sarah considered the beloved guy to be her husband. Having served 2/3 of their sentences, Wentworth and Paul were released from prison with a one-day difference. Waiting for both men outside the prison gates was Sarah, who by that time had fully recovered from the horrifying incident. Sarah and Paul got married and now live together with Wentworth in a house in the forest.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. but carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.